big theme when we talk about international relations between 1815 and 1914 was what role the alliance system played in the breakdown of international relations. Because quite often when you hear the word alliance or alliances, you think of something positive, you think of friendship, you think of countries actually coming together. And perhaps actually that's why the alliance system started. But as things went on between 1870 and 1914, the alliance system perhaps created more problems than what it was intended to. It was intended to solve problems. It actually ended up making more problems than it solved. A common question, when did the alliance system, because we always think about triple entente and the triple alliance, these two big power blocks that came to exist before the First World War, but where did it all start? Where did this idea of the alliance system actually come from? And it all goes back actually to Bismarck. It was Otto Bismarck, the German leader, who united Germany actually in 1871. 1871 united Germany. And it was Bismarck actually who came up with this idea. Now, his idea was very simple. He wanted to prevent war between particularly Austria and Russia. And the reason he was so worried about war between Austria and Russia was because of the Eastern Question. He wanted to prevent war between Austria and Russia. Austria and Russia. And the reason he was concerned about these two nations was because of the Eastern Question. And if you're not sure what the Eastern Question was, it was the decline of the Ottoman Empire. So the Turkish Empire in Europe, in North Africa, in the Middle East. This Turkish Empire, this Ottoman Empire was crumbling away. And as it crumbled away, it presented opportunities. And it presented opportunities for two countries in particular. Two countries that perhaps didn't have an empire at this point like Britain did or like France did. That didn't have, colonies or a particularly impressive navy, but did have that great power status and wanted some land. And wanted an empire, and they saw their opportunity to grab land very much in the Balkans, which at this point was under the control of the Ottomans. But as I've said, the Ottomans, as we've discussed in previous tutorials, their empire had been crumbling from 1815 onwards. They had to give Greece away. Greece achieved its independence in the 1830s. The Crimean War came about because Russia had tried to nick territory off the Ottomans in 1852. So you've got all these, there's just two examples. You've got all these examples from 1815 onwards of problems and tensions caused by the Eastern Question. And Bismarck was well aware of this, and he understood that if there was anything, and he was quoted as saying this, if anything was going to cause a major war in Europe, it was going to be the Eastern Question. So his very cunning plan, and it was cunning, was to bring Austria and Russia together. And he did that as early as 1872, when he set up something called the Dry Kaiser Bund. The Dry Kaiser Bund. In English, the Three Emperors League. The Three Emperors League. This was an alliance between Germany, Russia, and Austria. And it brought those three countries together, and it was actually followed later on, which we'll come on to later, by something called the Reinsurance Treaty, which was basically a reinstatement of the Dry Kaiser Bund. But essentially it started off with Russia, Austria, and Germany in this Three Emperors League. All well and good, because what Bismarck's big master plan was, if Austria and Russia, are working together, it's less likely they're going to have a war over, Ottoman territory or over the Balkans. And we mentioned why. Bismarck was worried. It was very simple. It was because of the Eastern Question. Now, as I say, it might be that you look up the Eastern Question, have a little look at what it was, read up on it, and see, the examples I've given: 1854, the Crimean War, the first major war between the great powers since 1815, since the Congress of Vienna. And what caused that war? Well, it's debated by historians. Some people say religion, but I'm sure, push comes to shove, it was about the crumbling of the Ottoman Empire, and Bismarck was well aware that that was what could cause war. So he sets up this Three Emperors League. However, and this is a big however, there is a war going on between 1875 and 1878, and it's a war between Slavic countries, the Slavs versus the Ottomans. A group of Slavic countries against the Ottomans. Russia sees itself as the protector of all Slavic people, whether they be in Eastern Europe or otherwise, and therefore decides to get involved. So in 1877, we have the Russo, whatever you want to call it, Turkish War. It doesn't last very long. The Russians are very, very successful in this war. And coming out of that war is a treaty. Now, obviously, Bismarck over here is panicking because he thinks, right, the Russians have easily beaten Turkey. The next step is they're going to cash in on their victory. And that's exactly what they did in the Treaty of San Stefano. The Treaty of San Stefano allowed for an enlarged Bulgaria, an enlarged and so-called independent Bulgaria. But what you actually had here was a new superpower in the Balkans. Bulgaria had increased its size massively as a country. You can see that on the map on there now. They had increased their size massively, and they would be a big ally to Russia, obviously, in the Balkans, and that's exactly what Russia wanted. Armenia also became part of Russia, and the Ottomans had to pay quite a hefty fine to Russia as part of this Treaty of San Stefano. Austria are not happy at all about this. They're getting nervous about it. Russia taking advantage of the Ottomans and also taking advantage of the situation with the Treaty of San Stefano. That's where Bismarck steps in and says, hang on a minute, this isn't right, this isn't fair. We need to come together as an international community to devise a more fair treaty, as Bismarck saw it. The Russians didn't. So Bismarck steps in and he calls a congress in Berlin. In 1878, and out of that was the Treaty of Berlin. Bosnia, as a result of this treaty, was given to Austria. Now, you've got to remember that this is as a result of a war that Russia has fought with the Ottomans because Russia didn't like the way that the Ottomans were treating Slavs in the Balkans. It's nothing to do with Austria, yet they've benefited by being given Bosnia by Bismarck, just to try and keep everybody big, happy families. The biggest problem with that, of course, is that the people who live in Bosnia are Serbs. And if you move forward all the way through to 1914, we know what's going to happen in 1914, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the Austrian Archduke who was visiting Sarajevo, Bosnia, and was shot by Bosnian Serb terrorists who didn't like the fact the Austrians were in charge. So that was the first big doo-doo by Bismarck, giving Bosnia to the Austrians who, were, yes, they were a great power, but why were they being given that? I'm not entirely sure. The other thing the Congress of Berlin did, which was also very important, was it split Bulgaria. So Bismarck's being very, very clever. Now, if you're reading this and you're Russian, you're not liking it. Bismarck split Bulgaria up, weakened Bulgaria. This whole affair signalled the end of the Three Emperors League. So, end of Three Emperors League. You can understand why. The Russians were not at all pleased with what had gone on. Now, what this then leads to, and you can see this now, Bismarck thought that the best way that he could, again, bring, if the Three Emperors League is going to cease to exist, then Bismarck's new strategy is to force Russia into an alliance by intimidating them. And the way he's going to do that is by introducing the dual alliance. I'll just get rid of system because it wasn't really a system, but the dual alliance of 1879. This alliance was between Germany and Austria. Germany and Austria, no Russia. No Russia. And the aim was, the Russians would look at this and think, hang on a minute, we better join forces with them. And actually, it worked. Because in 1881, the Russians got over all of this, and in 1881, they signed a new Dry Kaiser Bund. Dry Kaiser Bund, which Bismarck was obviously delighted with, because his realpolitik approach, his pragmatic approach to things, seems to be paying off. And this all led to the reinsurance treaty. I think I mentioned that earlier. Reinsurance treaty. Sorry, messed up there, but it doesn't matter. Reinsurance treaty of 1887. And the reinsurance treaty was between Germany and Russia. And Germany provided loans for Russia to build railways and other things that the Russians wanted as part of this agreement. This was all going to change because Bismarck's been very clever here. He's kept Austria and Russia friendly, and he's done that through this system of alliances that you can see in front of you now. But in 1890, Bismarck left office. Simultaneously, Bismarck left, and Kaiser Wilhelm becomes Kaiser of Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm never liked Bismarck, was glad to see the back of him. If you don't know anything about Kaiser Wilhelm, he was a very aggressive leader, and he had a policy from 1890 onwards called Weltpolitik. Weltpolitik, translated as world policy, promoted the idea that nothing should be done in the world without Germany's involvement. And as a result of that, the reinsurance treaty was not renewed. It was not renewed by Germany from 1890 onwards. And Russia didn't like this. Now, Russia's lost the alliance with Germany. The Dry Kaiser Bund, how much does that mean now? Well, probably not much. Years have passed, 1890, Kaiser Wilhelm, very aggressive in his foreign policy. Now, Russia is intimidated by Weltpolitik. And now we're going to see how we ended up, and I'm going to draw a big arrow here, how we ended up with this spiral of events which led to the alliance system becoming very different from what Bismarck had initially planned it to be. Russia suddenly decides, well, if we can't get on with Germany anymore, and Germany's pallying up with Austria and creating a bit of intimidation there for us, Russia is now going to side with France. A little bit unlikely, exactly what Bismarck will not have wanted, because what this now meant, of course, Germany is sandwiched between Russia and France, and France agrees to loan Russia the money it wants in 1891 and 1894, and Russia and France become very pally-pally. Now, while this is all going on, Britain is isolationist at this point, but Germany now tries to intimidate Britain. Not a good idea. Germany tries to intimidate Britain. So we have the 1904 Anglo-French Entente, where Britain and France, incredibly by surprise, sign a special agreement, an Entente Cordiale agreement between each other. And Kaiser Wilhelm thought that he could test that alliance. And the reason Britain and France have signed this alliance is because of German expansionism. The fact we now have an arms race in Europe, the fact, because of Weltpolitik, Germany is building battleships, building submarines. And Britain, who has the most powerful navy in the world, doesn't like this. And it looks for an ally. And the ally it chooses in all of this is the French. I mean, previous to 1900, it looked as though the British and the French could have a war over Africa. But now, they're actually, coming together. Which again, if Bismarck was looking at this, he would be trembling. Now, of course, we know that Russia has already looked to France for its loans that it lost when Germany backed out of the reinsurance treaty. So Russia and France are pally, Britain and France are pally. So in 1906, the Triple Entente. The Triple Entente was created. Now, Germany, of course, when it loses its touch with Russia after 1890 and Russia goes off with France, Germany adds Italy to its alliance with Austria, and that becomes the Triple Alliance. The Triple Alliance. Now, if you suddenly look, by 1907, 1908, Triple Alliance versus Triple Entente, I think we can work out who has the strongest alliance. There isn't a balance of power. Russia, Britain and France versus Germany, a crumbling Austria, and a weak Italy, a new country Italy. It wasn't strong enough to be in the same bracket as France, Britain or Russia at that point. So suddenly Germany feels intimidated, Germany feels alone, and because of that it starts to lash out. Germany starts to lash out, and then we have that series of events that leads up to World War One. Where Germany, we have the Moroccan crisis of 1905 and 1911, where the Kaiser visited Morocco to try and intimidate Britain, to try and intimidate France, and France ended up getting even more pally-pally with Britain. So we have this Triple Alliance and Triple Entente, and the sides are very much set, and Germany is continuing to build more weapons. Britain's continuing to get more worried about Germany, and that's when Germany comes up with the Schlieffen Plan, their plan to win any war in Europe that involves invading France first before turning back onto Russia. So suddenly the intrigue and the mystery about what's going to happen, it suddenly starts to look more likely that we could have a global war that can involve more countries. And I mentioned that flashpoint, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. We could argue that if it wasn't for this alliance system, Franz Ferdinand and Austria, the country he represented, wouldn't have even had Bosnia in the first place.